Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. This is Mushtaq with the Happy Strong Family weekly live stream. And this time around, as we've always mentioned within this podcast series, we do deconstruct, we do block and tackle some of the hard questions and some of what may or may not be cultural. And this time round, we are going to be talking up masculinity. It is a theme, a really current hot topic, especially with the likes of, well, I'll just throw the celebrities right there right now, Andrew Tate, and the extension of masculinity right now is toxic masculinity. So we're going to be talking it up through the lens of Quran and Sunnah. We're going to be talking it up in the lens of what our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the best example for all humankind, and by extension of that, by mankind. We're going to use examples from his life and what he did or didn't do to define masculinity. So to my left, we have this time around guest, Shaykh Abdullah Misra. Shaykh, welcome to the show.
Assalamu alaikum, jazakallah khairan. Thank you so much.
Wa alaikum salam. So let's get into it. We wanted to keep this free flowing. Now, I find with a lot of the youth right now, they're either the concept of emasculation or being an alpha male, or again, this is going to be a little bit of a hard discussion. There's no really right or wrong, as we were discussing off the air. But okay, well, what about a woman? For a man has to be a man and a woman has to be a woman. Well, okay, let's put away all the tropes. Let's put away all the stereotypes. We're not in the 40s or 50s, nor are we talking up feminism here, but we're going to be, again, framing it within the context of masculinity. So, Sheikh, kind of start us off. Whatever that definition or notion or pretext is, what is it within the lens or boundaries of Quran and Sunnah?
Yeah, Bismillah ar-Rahman. It's a very good question. It's something that was very obvious to generations before. In fact, many parts of the world when you go there, when you say, well, what's masculinity, what's femininity, they're saying, isn't that obvious? It doesn't help much that both Western and Islamic definitions are centered on the sex, the gender, and saying whatever characteristics they have. So, for example, right, from the Islamic point of view, I tried to look up a definition of what is maleness, dhukura, right, or masculinity, and you will not find in many of the kind of different texts that we have, you don't find a very detailed explanation of that. It just says qualities of being a male.
Okay,
and then they'll say it is opposite to being a female.
Oh,
okay,
all right.
So that's one thing, and this is actually in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about gender. And gender is a fact of life, right? The sex and gender being the same thing. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that we created you from a single male and a single female, and then we created, humankind out of that. So that's the dhakar and the untha, is the male and the female. And then after that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says something that's very defining about gender identity, you could say, or about this question, which is, وَلَيْسَ الذَّكَرُ كَالْأُنْثَى, that a male is not like a female.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like a kind of a universal statement that Allah says, even though it's in a certain context that was said in a certain context, but you can extend that to apply to this idea that what is it about masculinity? It's what makes it unique from femininity.
Okay.
Right? It's what makes it unique. And, when I did a search, like if you do a cursory search, go up online, you see from the Oxford dictionaries, they said, what is masculinity? They said qualities or attributes regarded as characteristic for men and boys. Leave it at that.
Sure.
But interestingly, even from and this is like an internet Western definition, when you look at what the similar words are, you know what words come up like synonyms? Virility, manliness, vigor, strength, ruggedness, toughness, robustness. Those are the similar nouns, okay? Even though it has nothing to actually, it's not the same thing as masculinity, but you understand why it's related.
Right.
And then it says opposite, meaning the antonym, femininity. So there is a binary. It's even according to that definition. Interestingly, when you go to look up femininity in that same thing, it says, the definition, qualities or attributes regarded as characteristic of women or girls. But when you see similar names, it doesn't describe anything.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
It doesn't describe anything. it just says different variations of femininity, womanhood, feminineness. So masculinity is something that I think, what I'm trying to say is, whether it's Western or Islamic societies, it's understood what it always was. If you want to see a definition of masculinity, remember something, that in Islam too, we have this concept of dhukura, which is maleness, and then you have rujula, which is manliness.
Okay.
So there's really two different things.
Mm-hmm.
Dhukura is just the state of being a biological male and the things that go along with that. And many of those things are, you could have kind of, that could be the positives and the negatives of that sex. Rujula, the way that they define that word, which is manliness, which I did find a definition for, which is a very, very beautiful one. What is it? It is the perfection of distinguishing qualities of an adult male of Bani Adam. The perfection of those qualities. And so if in our discussion of what it means to be a male, we want to go, we're not just looking at what stereotypically are the attitudes of males. We all understand that if you've had, if you're a male or if you've had a dad or an uncle, but what we're trying to look at is, what is the perfection of the distinguishing qualities? That's what makes someone a man.
Right. I mean, when we look at, again, this is very stereotypical, ultra stereotypical, an ultra trope unto itself about, to your point, by the Oxford Dictionary standard, ruggedness and strength.
Yeah.
You can look at any meme out there about the man must buy a pickup truck and the man is eating cigarettes for breakfast, and he wrestled a bear and he did this all before having his morning coffee. Like, come on, guys, come on. Like, is that really being a man? No. So, Shaykh, this is a very interesting concept now, manliness. Mm-hmm. So what are some of the examples by our very own Prophet ﷺ to exhibit that perfection of manliness, right? When you strive in the path of Islam, when you strive for your deen, you're continually working on yourself. Yep. It is a method of what, psychologists and psychiatrists now understand to be professional development, right? Whether it's in a work setting, a personal setting, you are continually striving to work on yourself, self-reflection, self-education, development, all of these terms for the self. So kind of walk us through this now. Give us actual examples, again, from Hadith and Sunnah, perhaps.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, if somebody was to say, what is our Islamic definition of manliness? I would say the Prophet ﷺ and his life and his example. There's no doubt about that.
Okay, 100%. Yes.
100%, right? I mean, like, because at the end of the day, we're not looking at examples, like, as you said, smoking a pack of cigarettes before breakfast or something like that. Yeah, it may be something that some men in some cultures do, but that's not what we want to see as our example. Or, getting into a fight in the schoolyard. Okay, that's a boyish thing to do. We all went through that, but it's not something you want to hold up as the standard of what it means to be a man. And so this is why when you look even at the Quran, first of all, the word, rajul, it comes from the word your rijl, which is your legs. You're standing on your own 2 feet, basically. Okay. It's someone standing upright, right? And it's someone who feet firmly planted on the ground, so they're firm in what they believe. When you look at how Allah uses this term, He uses the word rajul or rijal about 50 different times in the Quran, perhaps more. And when you look at some of the iconic ayat where Allah uses the term rijal very, very purposely, because He's trying to remind men that this is how men are supposed to be, right? So, I mean, even like the first one, the verse that comes to mind is ar-rijalu qawwamuna 'ala an-nisa, right? That men are the you could say leaders and caretakers of women, right? And why? Because of what Allah has given them in terms of how they can support, how they can protect, how they have these qualities, and by what they are supposed to spend over their families. So that's an example of, people take this wrong and they only look at one aspect of it. Like, it only means that you're the boss. You can sit back. No, that's not what it ever was.
Exactly.
And this is the problem. This is exactly the problem. Why that's contested is because of how we have come away from the prophetic example. So this idea of like, I'm a male, I don't have to clean up, I don't have to do anything, I just have to come home, put my feet up on the table. That's what it means to be a male? That's the leadership of a male? No, absolutely not, right? Rather, the Prophet ﷺ, when he was asked, what was he like? Aisha said, he's like any other man. Okay, listen, as any other man. He's in the service of his family. He takes care of his animal. He patches his clothing, helping his wife. These are the hadiths when they describe how the Rasul ﷺ was. It's that he was engaged actively, and yes, The majority of his responsibilities, though, were outside dealing with certain things and other things. But when he came home, it wasn't like he was absent from the home and just wanted to be outside, right? You have that's one of the verses that often gets misconstrued by Orientalists and others. The other verses, like for example, مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ رِجَالٌ صَدَقُوا مَا عَاهَدُوا اللَّهَ عَلَيْهِ. From the believers, there are men, and when Allah says without there's a kind of a grammatical detail. When Allah says it in the indefinite, He didn't say ar-rijal. He said rijalun. There are some strong men among the believers who are true to what they promised Allah. They are true to what they committed to Allah. And there are those people who sacrifice themselves for what they told they would do for Allah, and those who are waiting to serve Allah in that way, to give their whole life. And it doesn't mean just in one thing. It means in committing yourself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And وَمَا بَدَّلُوا تَبْدِيلًا. And they're not people who just like change who they are. There's a firmness of characteristic, right? There's another one there that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, رِجَالُ لَا تُلْهِيهِمْ تِجَارَةُ وَلَا بَيْعٌ عَنْ ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. That they are men, real men, who trade and selling does not distract them from the dhikr of Allah. So in actuality, real men are those in the Islamic concept, not just people who have male, physical characteristics, but they're people who stand for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're people who do not get distracted by, the dunya and become soft and servants of their desires. They're people who can resist some of their desires in order to do what's right. And as long as that's what's happening, the men are in a good state. When they can resist some of their desires for a greater cause, whether it's for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or even the benefit of their family. For example, put away that video game. You have to spend time with your children.
Right.
Stop watching TV all the time. Talk to your wife. That's maybe you might have the desire to or go out in the cafe every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday with your friends. No, you can put that desire a little bit aside to help out. So there's an idea where it's not distracting them. And they establish prayer and they pay their zakat. And they fear a day, right, when the hearts and their gazes will be overturned, meaning they're accountable. So when men are like this, then there's no contestation about what it means to be masculine.
Right.
There's no problem. Everybody's happy with that.
Beautiful.
When we start to get away from that, now this is where we even have to start asking, what does it mean to be masculine?
Right. So, Shaykh, to paraphrase, and I'm very loosely paraphrasing, but again, I'm going to put it into perhaps modern day terms. What you're saying very clearly, whether we like it or not, believing men, okay, in terms of masculinity, they shouldn't go window shopping with their eyes, okay? Kind of just, don't go openly window shopping and be like, oh, let the mind wander, because we all know what happens with that for men in particular. Be accountable to yourself, be accountable to your family. How many of us are like, oh yeah, you know what, I'm going to hang out with the guys, play pool until 1-2 o'clock in the morning, on a Friday night. How many of us are like going out and hanging out with the boys, hanging out with the guys, till umpteen hours of the day? I could use other examples, but they won't be Islamic.
Exactly. Yeah.
Maybe not, maybe. And then it always comes to the home, right? Whether it's your children, whether it's your spouse, i.e. your wife, whether it's yourself, how much time are we spending with our spouses, with our wives? Because at the end of the day, a wife will want a partner, right? They don't want a checkbook. Yes, every wife will want financial stability, but they won't want a partner that's absent. They want a partner that's loving and strong in the sense to fill the gaps. Right. I think that's what many of us are kind of missing. It's not this alpha male approach. It's not that, if you, as an example, it's 2023, by the way. And believe it or not, Shaykh, I still get, poked at and be like, oh, you vacuum. Oh, you must be good at vacuuming. Well, what does that mean? What the? Yeah. Oh, I was about to use expletive. What in the world does that mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Clearly a little bit passionate about. It's not a sore topic with me, but again, what does that mean if I do vacuum in the house?
Right.
Am I any less of a male? No, hell no. Right. So, Shaykh, again, walk us through again, very quickly, because we have a lot of questions on this topic, a lot.
Yeah, I can
A
see.
lot, a
Yeah.
lot. Producer Kashif has just been loading them up on the screen a lot. Clearly, people want guidance. People want
Yeah.
to be educated on this.
Yeah.
They're seeking knowledge on this. So how about maybe then, Producer Kashif, we kind of cut to some of those questions for the Shaykh, please.
Yeah, Jazakallah khair. So before we go to the questions, a few housekeeping items.
Sure.
So next week, inshallah, just want to remind audiences that we got Shaykh Muslim Khan, another prominent Imam and scholar in Toronto, coming on the show. So we ask everyone to tune in for that. And then also, so we'll get to the questions. I've sort of copied them over as they were asked. I will warn that some of them, obviously we can't do justice on a podcast without context, without, understanding it. And some of them, Shaykh, I truly understand. Maybe even if you try, it will do more harm than benefit on a podcast, right? So feel free to say that. This requires more detailed. And if anyone is looking for Shaykh Abdullah Misra's contact information, he's been kind enough to provide it. So we have his. So if anyone's looking for counseling, there's Canadian Muslim Counseling, which is an organization which he provides counseling through. So you can go to their website, Canadian Muslim, I think is muslimcounseling.ca, and then over there see his calendar and book an appointment if you're interested in counseling. And then there's also on Instagram and on Facebook. Shaykh is very active. His handle is @Abdullah.Misra for both of those. So inshallah, you can also connect with him there. He does very frequent Q&A sessions on Instagram also. So you have the opportunity to ask him some questions there also. So yes, we'll get to the questions now. So again, I'm just presenting these. There was a topic that we had snuck in on the poster about being the middleman between husbands and between wives and mothers, because that question comes up a lot. Actually, we get that a lot. So this one specifically was saying sort of, I recently got married. There have been many issues that come up between the two families. My wife lives with me at home as a joint family and does not feel respected or comfortable living as a joint family and wants to move separate. But sorry, you got cut off there. But it's saying, but my mother is demanding us to stay home. I need advice on what to do next. I am very stressed, and the situation is having a very negative impact on me.
Oh my.
Yeah. Okay, Bismillah. I guess we're ready to go into this side of
we are. Let's
side of the issues.
Jump right into it.
Yeah. So Bismillah. I think that to our questioner who asked that question, we have to remember that when you get married, your first responsibility now becomes watching out for your wife and your children, and that responsibility is very, very important. Culturally, unfortunately, in the past, it was seen that the wife is kind of like suffering in the house while she's in a joint family system, and she just has to suffer through it for all the years until she waits for basically her in-laws to pass away or they move away. And that's not really a nice way of living, to be very honest, right?
No.
If you're going to have a joint family system, which is not necessarily purely Islamic, it's more like cultural.
Yes.
So you had a system, in the past where, let's say, everybody has like tents. You still have your own quarters. You still lived around each other, but you have your own quarters and privacy. The problem that's happened in our cultures, and for different reasons, maybe it worked in those cultures, but it's that a woman may not even have the privacy in her house to just feel like she's the queen of her own home.
Right.
And every woman wants to feel like she's the queen of her own home, just like every man wants to feel like he's the king of his own house.
Yes.
And what happens is that there's also a type of emasculation that also occurs, to be very honest, when a man is not able to be independent in his own home because he has other forces kind of telling him how to live. And you see, what's happening here in this situation is that, he's being told by his parents one thing, but it's causing clear stress to him and his wife.
Yes.
Yet he cannot say, this is what I want to do.
Right.
And so I'm sorry, this may upset some people who are very used to cultural joint families. I've lived in a joint family situation in my life. I've tried that before. I've tried, living independently, which I do now. And I'll tell you that part of it is that every man has to come to this thing where I love my parents. I love my mother.
Yeah.
But I need to be a man and decide what I want to do. If you live happily and everybody's fine, alhamdulillah. It's all everyone's consent, and that's fine. But does the wife have the right to her own quarters? Definitely she does. Does the wife have the right to privacy? Of course. So if you want to have a thriving marriage, which is the priority of getting married, like, why did you get married? If you just You just want to have someone serve you, but there's no interest in it for the woman other than you see what I'm saying?
I completely
So do you want your next generation to look at Muslim marriage as a positive thing, or do you want them to look at Muslim marriage as something where, oh man, my mom was she had it bad, my grandmother had it bad, I don't want to be like that?
Yeah.
So this is why, if you're wondering, like, wait, this doesn't sound like the typical answer we're going to get, it's because we're from this generation.
Yeah.
And we're realizing that, look, you're not going to have your wife suffering for all these years. So this is why I say that this is part of the emasculation that occurs, where parents keep telling the child, the son, they have to keep doing this. So even as an adult, he's like a man boy, where he can't put his foot down and say, Mom, Dad, I love you guys, I really respect you, but I'm making a decision for the betterment of my wife and her mental health and my family.
Yes.
So that's what I would say, brother, is if you, to the questioner, get some guidance on this if you need, from people who can do it in a balanced way. No one's saying that you just storm out of the house. No, not at all. Islam says to respect. Islam says to love and cherish. But there are certain responsibilities that you have. You have to learn them. And when you learn about them, you'll realize that you have to do what it takes to try to fulfill them if you can.
Right. And as you say, Shaykh, again, I'm just loosely paraphrasing here, but the responsibility of now being married and the responsibility of your wife, i.e. this questioner's wife, now supersedes him being a son, right? Now supersedes him being a son. And I've seen myself in my own circle, there are sons who have grown up in a strong joint family system. They've moved out, but look, they're literally 3 houses away down the street.
Right.
So like, to your point, you can maintain that balance.
You can.
The queen is still the queen of her castle, of her home. The man is still, there supporting the family and whatnot. And he's still a good son. Right. Because he's just a few houses away.
Yeah.
So, all right, that's one way of doing it.
Yeah. And the one that benefits most out of this, you might think it's the woman who's benefiting from separating. No, it's not. It's the man, because the man does not feel emasculated by that.
Right.
So he now finally gets to say, I'm the king of my castle. I can take care of my family the way I want. And that actually orders the rest of the family in the proper way. Okay. But what's happened is when the man who's supposed to be leader of the home in that sense, when that's not going properly, how does the woman have that respect for the man? So it's all going to create this tension.
Yes.
Right?
Producer Kashif, next question, please.
Yep. So it was a good segue, actually, when we were talking about leadership and within the home.
Mm-hmm.
So the question that came in was, sorry, I got to jump a bit over here.
No worries. Take your time.
So it said, I am a revert looking to marry. Most of the females I meet take issue with the hierarchy Islam brought and our beloved Prophet ﷺ taught. If we discuss husband being the Amir, the guardian, the provider, it is met with eye rolls from her. And sorry, the rest of the question says, how can I be a man if the other side does not allow me to?
That's a very, very good question. And that's getting into this podcast is about masculinity. In reality, the contestation is not on masculinity in our society, it's in femininity. And that's why you couldn't find a definition for what femininity really means. Masculinity, we all understand, but the contestation really is femininity. And that's why very, very, that takes a whole other podcast, right? And that's why it's something that nobody wants to touch, but the people who do touch it come into a lot of controversy.
Okay, well, let's deconstruct this and let's tackle it.
Well, here's what happened, right? For example, we all understand what traditional masculinity and femininity is.
Yes.
The problem is when I asked, I asked somebody, a lady I trust, right? That, why is it that you were more traditional when you were living in the Muslim world? When you came to the West, a little bit less so, kind of a blended kind of Western traditional.
Mm-hmm.
And she said that in the Eastern society, it allows you to be feminine. The society is structured so that it's easy to do that. You have extended family systems where there's a support. You're not overburdened only one person with all the housework.
Mm-hmm.
You have a lot of freedom. You're able to go around and have a rich social life, because it's not just you and a nuclear family at home in a box. And then the expenses are not so high in a society where both people have to go out and work and stuff like that. So what happens is when you come here, the society does not allow for that traditional role to necessarily take place. And sometimes as well, the way the education has gone here, it doesn't promote that. And so naturally, you're going to have to understand that our sisters are going to grow up in a situation where they're not going to see things the way that their mothers or grandmothers saw it.
Okay.
So because of that situation as well, the brothers who are the men who are raised to look at traditional male kind of roles strictly according to what is kind of Eastern now, they're going to find they don't have any takers or very few takers among Western women.
Mhm.
And this is where we have to realize that, look, it's not going to be perfect. Like the male wants the Eastern ideal, and sometimes the woman wants the Western ideal. And really, it's about meeting in the middle. This is like the honest truth I can say. What I'm saying is not Quran and Sunnah in the sense that we're all dealing with these issues in real time. So we're developing these ideas. How do you meet in the middle? Do I just say to the sisters, no, sisters, become traditional? Do I say to the men just all become kind of liberal, and no, I don't think the answer is in either of those things. I think that we have to realize that in our masculinity, that is prophetic, and in the femininity, which is also Islamic, there are some accommodations and there are some dealing with the real picture on the ground, rather than looking at like a theoretical and living in the theory.
Mhm.
And that's part of the problem as well. The brother mentioned he's a revert. I'm a revert. I'm a convert and revert myself. So I know that when we become encultured into Islam, sometimes we take like a theory and we try to apply that to the real world. And then we see a clash. So we don't know what to do. And I think what it is, we have to prepare ourselves as men, try to be on the prophetic way, and then look at the realistic situation of what our marriages are going to be like and make that work as much as possible. And find someone who's willing to meet somewhere in the middle. Otherwise, then go to a society where you're more likely to find the type of person you're thinking about.
Right. Let me kind of approach it at a different angle. I'm just to this person, to this brother who asked the question, in terms, and I'm picking apart, and forgive me, brother. I'm there's a method to the madness here. Words like amir, okay, leadership.
Yeah.
Again, when we look at the sahabiyat, when we look at during the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, these women, the women of Islam, whether it was Aisha, Fatima, Juwairiya, Salama, I mean, these are like the icons of our faith, right? As much as you can hopefully educate yourself on who these iconic women were,
Right.
there were times, if you look at the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there came a time after the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, all the companions, all the troops were just damn tired. They were so tired, right? They were so tired. And the treaty was just concession after concession after concession. And Umar radiallahu anhu, who was like the strongest, most intense, companion of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the Abu Bakr, the rock, I guess you could say his best friend, without a doubt. Both of them, Umar radiallahu anhu, actually came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and said, "Oh Prophet, like what's this treaty about? We've conceded. Like, are you still on guidance?" He asked them flat out. That's the kind of relationship they had. And he said, "Yes, Umar, but did I ever tell you like when we're going to be able to do Umrah?" It was all about Umrah, right? It was all about Umrah. And he said, "I never gave you a timeline, did I?" And then so Umar backed down, right? But that was the mindset of all the companions. They were just tired. They couldn't understand. Allah is obviously the master planner. He had the master plan. It did work out in the end. If you know what the Treaty of Hudaybiyah was and the context here that I'm talking about, the story of the prophets, the story of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his seerah. But it came a time where he actually told the Sahaba, "Okay, get up, let's do our Umrah. Let's shave our head, wear the ihram, slaughter our animal." He told them once, no response. He told them twice, no response. He told them 3 times. These are the same Sahaba that, if anyone even approached the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they would get all upset and angry, be like, "Who are you? How dare you talk to our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam like this?" These are the same Sahaba. He told them 3 times, no response. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam left. He went to his wife. Okay, I believe at the time, Salama.
Yeah.
And Salama said, "Oh Prophet, your troops, your companions, they're tired. They don't understand what's going on. You have the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You have the guidance of angels. Like, they don't know what you know. So why don't you go out and actually lead in this example? And you shave your head.
Yeah.
You wear the ihram. You slaughter the animal. You make the tawaf. You do it." And lo and behold, that's exactly what happened.
Wow.
He did it. So in terms of leadership, maybe if we can even educate ourselves and say, in terms of leadership, it's to be a man. It means to go out and lead. But you look at this example here. Who did the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam ask for guidance? He went back to his wife. His wife, Salama, gave him that guidance.
Right.
That's partnership, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Now, whether you're potentially a female CEO, and I've brought this up in past, in past episodes, whether you're a Muslim female CEO, whether you're a Muslim, female vice president of a large company, you are a leader in your own right, 100%. That's without a doubt. But what you need is someone to fill in the gaps. What you need is for a man to be like, oh, you know what, honey, you've had a tough day at work. I'll cook that meal for you. That's what we mean by real time, isn't it, Shaykh? For someone to be like, you know what, the Prophet ﷺ did the house chores. He went to his wife and asked for guidance. He never single-handedly made a decision by himself. He never said, I'm the man. I'm going to make all the decisions. I am the mirror. No.
Yeah, this is exactly the problem. Yeah, because what the word Amir has now come to mean is a dictator, essentially.
Yeah.
And so if that Amir or leader, if it means an authoritarian dictator who doesn't consult, who doesn't consider, who doesn't care, no wonder people are so allergic to those terms, because they're like, are you going to take away my autonomy? Are you going to think about me? And this is really part of the problem when we get away from that prophetic model. But the other thing is this, in that story that you mentioned, it's a beautiful story. There's a lesson here for us, in which the Prophet ﷺ was making concession after concession, but he was making it for a greater good and knowing that that was the best thing to do at that time.
Yes.
Whereas the Sahaba, who are really strong men, they were like, why should we concede? Why should we compromise?
Yeah.
We are right. You're wrong. We're going to do this. But the Prophet says, look, if you do that, you're going to head to disaster if you try to not do that. So that's another thing that men find very difficult sometimes, is the idea of conceding, the idea of compromising, because we're living in a society right now where I know there are many young men who just want to live the life, of a total Amir. And that's, mashallah, that's good in all the ways that they think it means culturally. But there are realities on the ground that we have to look at.
Definitely.
Right? And part of that is where our sisters are at emotionally, mentally, spiritually, to be able to come and meet them in the middle to make Muslim marriage work.
Yes.
Because the point is not, I'm going to stand on my side. I'm going to tell you to come here. You're not going to come. And I'm going to stand on my side. That's not the point. Then nobody benefits from that.
Yeah.
But if you come together and say, look, what's the whole point? We're going to try to, see what accommodations we can make and try to be as prophetic as possible. That's when you come and you make Muslim marriage work for the next generation. That's important.
Well said. Well said.
Yeah.
Producer Kashyap, next question, please.
Yes, absolutely. So I guess we'll finish the few that are left on marriage type things. So this questioner, she was asking, should a husband give his wife a monthly income, which she can spend as she wills?
She can do that. He can do that if he wants to, but there's no obligation on him to do so. So as long as he is able, but you see, this is the thing. If your wife has no money for herself, do you think she'll and you're not giving her anything she wants, and you're not spending on her, you're not giving her those things, then what do you think she's going to say in a society where most women are working?
Yeah.
You say, fine, I'm going to go out and work and get what I want.
Right.
And you say, no, you can't do that because you're trying to be traditional. So you can't have it both ways, right? So if you want to maintain a traditional lifestyle, then fulfill the needs of the people around you. So, the same thing as, but the idea of, do you have to give your wife like an income or an allowance? No, not necessarily. Not every man can afford that. If you do so and it's generous, mashallah, that's very good. But there are some men who would do so and it would not cover anything much at all. So it really depends with what type of generous spirit you do that, and what your financial situation and your understanding is. Some women are like, no, I don't need something. As long as whenever I need it, I can take it.
That's it.
Okay, that's good. Many of them are like, I'd rather do that, because you'll end up getting more perhaps out of that. And others are like, okay, well, I don't want to feel like I have an allowance. Some people don't mind it. So the point is this: other than providing, as for a man who provides, right, all the necessities of the home, the way that you come to the compromise, you have to decide. It's not like a sheikh can decide that for you, every little thing. It's not like a rule book in Islam will say how to do every single thing in your house. You just have to be mature and see, how am I going to make this marriage work? Right. And that's how you come to that agreement.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'll give a very personal example. Very personal. You can probably figure out who it is by me, just by the fact that I'm being this vulnerable and sharing it. But in terms of finances, there is one account, which is the account for every single expense, even if we go out for coffee.
Right.
Okay. Even if we were going out for a little, alhamdulillah, 20+ year marriage coffee date, that money for the coffee and the croissants will come out of this account.
Right.
And then there is her Rainbow Day slush fund account that she uses because there is money going in there for whatever she wants.
Right.
Whether it's to buy herself, I'm just going to put it again in the modern context, a Coach bag or anything else.
Right.
It's her right, her choice, her decision.
Right.
That's it. End of story.
Right.
So just one example, just putting it out there, men, brothers.
Yeah,
wives,
No,
sisters.
and the same thing is if she earns money, which many women work in our time, then that money's hers.
100%.
You see, that's another thing.
100%.
That's another thing. And this is where we have to realize that there is going to be a slight kind of like a friction between traditional Islamic and modern Western, where we have to come to that understanding. Where like, okay, maybe she doesn't need money from the husband. Maybe the husband needs money from her, like in just to make ends meet.
Yeah.
So again, what's the method to it? You compromise and you sit down and you say, look, these are my responsibilities. This is where, if you want to have this lifestyle, just see where does it work? Where is it best for us and our children? Come to a common understanding with prophetic character. That's much better than saying, I deserve this. And you see what I'm saying?
I do.
It's not working.
Totally do.
It's not working in your situation. Yeah.
I totally do. Well said again. Producer Kashif, next question.
Next question. Do masculine Muslim men really want to practice polygamy? I personally don't see the connection. I think it depends on, your intentions, the situation, context, but maybe I'm missing something. Is there a connection between masculinity and marrying multiple wives?
So so no, I don't think there's any necessary connection. Remember, practicing polygamy means to marry multiple women, right? That doesn't mean that males, maybe some men don't want to practice it because they can't practically do that. They may have desire for multiple women. So that might be something that I think is more programmed in men. Generally, it's common. That's why the question is even being asked, right? That doesn't mean that anyone who's masculine necessarily. So, for example, the Prophet ﷺ had only one wife, Khadija, radiallahu anha, for the first many years, for the first 25 years.
Right.
Does that mean that he was not masculine if he didn't practice polygamy? No, right? And then after that, the Prophet ﷺ went on to marry 10 more wives after the death of Khadija. Does that mean he was more masculine in that time? No. So it tells you that the arrangement and what you choose is not what determines how masculine you are, right? Now, it may be that some men desire that, but that has nothing to do with if they actually implement it or if that comes into the picture, whether that's a societal thing, whether that's normal in your society or not. In our society, it's illegal, first of all, here, but it's also not the norm. So to peg, and this is a dangerous trope for our young men.
Yes.
That, especially when I first became Muslim, I was obsessed with this idea of polygamy. I liked it. I liked the idea, but why? Because everyone's joking about it. Everyone's bigging you up. And when you're a young guy, 18 years old, you don't know any better. And I'm just saying very honestly, because a lot of young men are actually raised like that in religious circles. Like, hey, man, you got to get another wife. So what do you think is going to happen? Then you get married to your first wife. No one's taught you how to be a prophetic gentleman. And the first thing they start doing is poking their wife on this issue. And you're wondering why she's upset, why she's sad. Because that's not something normal in this society, right?
Exactly.
And
absolutely.
then you've been taught to almost think that it's like it's something to joke around about. And this young guy can't even support one wife barely. He's still living with his parents. He's talking about 2 and 3. So it's in this situation. It's like this is where masculinity has been skewed.
Yes.
Just being something that was responsibility and an essential way to support survival, and then made that into basically what is like simply a lustful desire that shows male dominance. That's not necessarily what Islam is looking at when it has that institution, right?
Definitely.
So I think that part of that is being misrepresented to our young men and also misrepresented to our young women on either extreme.
Yeah, Shaykh, look, I'll speak out on this as well. It's one of those things where whether it's polyamory, polygamy, open relationship, having multiple partners, that's not what the Prophet ﷺ did. Right? And you got to look again. I will always encourage anyone who is willing to listen, anyone who's willing to understand, educate yourself, read the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And if you look at what the ulama will tell you, they will tell you if you even are dare or able, if you're able to go down this path, there are some strict guidelines. Okay, very strict guidelines. And one, the obvious one, if you even are able financially to get another wife, then it has to be so equal that I'll just put it in Canadian context. Living here in Markham, if you happen to have a $2 million home, well, hell yeah, you got to get a $2 million home for your other wife. right?
Mm.
Shaykh, I'm not making this up. If we look at the very strict guidelines on this concept of, more than one wife, then it has to be lickety split down the middle, even Steven,
Yeah.
like so even Steven that, this is like a myth now, right? It's just
It's become
it's a legend. Oh man, this man is a legend because he has two wives.
It's like a fantasy.
It's a fantasy.
It's a fantasy, and the problem,
it is a fantasy, 100%.
Right. And the problem is, to pursue this fantasy, people will break their first marriage.
Yeah.
So you have not understood the point of marriage.
No.
Because if the women of your time are not able to, they don't agree, or they don't they don't understand the concept, then why would you introduce something which would break your first marriage in order to practice something that is highly theoretical for our society and illegal? First of all, that's as well something to think about. So it's not just about money. I've had wealthy men come to me and say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. And it's like, well, what's going to happen? My first wife said she'll leave me. It's like, well, is that what you want? You want your first wife to leave with you and your kids?
Exactly.
Why? Because it's not something that is normal in this society. And so whereas we don't say on paper, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's in the Quran to accommodate every different type of society in the world that will ever happen. There are guidelines. But does that mean that you kind of throw that around like a kind of a joke? Now, there may be some situations and certain circumstances in which, the family is like that. They're all open to that. And there may be some, that's where you now go down this guideline of consulting with the scholars and saying, hey, what's the need for this? Is this something that people are all supportive of? There's going to be greater benefit, or will there be greater harm? Right. That may be like an individual exceptional case. But this is something where the discussion of it actually does more harm to families, which is against the Islamic interest of having homes in which kids can grow up feeling secure.
Yeah. Again, I'm just going to put it out there. For a lot of the young generation right now, it's a fantasy, guys. Park it, leave it alone. Don't approach your wife that, hey, this is something you even want to do. It's not worth it. Not worth it. Producer Kashif, next question.
Yeah, I've been at so many family gatherings that are going well. Then the jokes about that topic start, and then just completely the entire mood of the gathering changes. So all my younger cousins, the new generation, I'm like, don't even joke about it. Like, why do you want to get that response and trigger people?
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay, so the next set of questions now actually had to do more with a bit more on the parenting side of things. And the most common question that came in was, how can we nurture healthy masculinity in our boys in a society where gender roles continue to become more and more blurred? And so this was the big one where a few questions came in. There's a lack of present day strong role models and possibly absent fathers.
Yeah, this is the epidemic. This is like the epidemic of the failure to launch, as Dr. Leonard Sachs puts it in his book, Boys Adrift. So it's something that even non-Muslims are noticing. Of course, there is a crisis of what's happening to our boys. We have to recognize that they are not being, because their gender role is not being kind of expressed or promoted in a healthy way. It's leading to kind of these two extremes, which is, one is like the apathetic, listless, ineffectual, emasculated boy man who just wants to live in his parents' basement and play video games all day.
Right.
That's one thing. And then there's another, a smaller minority, but those who feel strongly, they have a masculine energy. They don't know how they can take that out or how they can do that because they're told it's wrong. So it ends up in anger. It ends up in aggression. It ends up in, unfortunately, even like a movement that will want to take advantage of women in the name of being, in the name of virility and being strong and high value male. So that's neither, the prophetic example is neither of those two things. So how can we do this? We have to define, like doing what we're doing today, which is taking back a definition of masculinity that takes in account our modern realities where we have to accommodate, and trying to teach that prophetic example as much as possible, trying to have masajid where, for example, and youth groups where someone who's a good example of that is your role model, is the role model, in order to bring our young boys around that example, to promote the idea of that responsibility in young men. But then what happens is you're going to also have to temper that while you teach them all those things about manliness, about how to have finesse in while you're doing that.
Yes.
And how to be a gentleman while you're doing that. But it's not just all the soft stuff. So some of it is the rough and tumble. Some of it is a little bit less helicopter parenting.
Yeah.
A lot of it is let them get out there, let them get a scrape on their knee. Let them get into a fight in the schoolyard. Come back. How do you deal with it?
Right.
So the problem is we don't even let boys be boys. And so we have to realize where we as parents are even stopping them from doing that, and see that they're not just trying to behave bad because they're bad kids, but because there's a lack of examples out there. So those of us who feel that they have something to offer, let's step up and help this generation of boys that are coming up. And if we need our help in our generation, help ourselves first by looking at the rijal, the real men on the prophetic way, who are older than us.
Producer Kashif, I'm sure we still have a few more
Yeah,
questions
we have
to go.
a few more questions
Just
to
being
go.
mindful
We
of
got,
the time.
10 minutes. I got one question at the end too.
Yeah.
So the term toxic came up in a few of the questions.
Yeah.
So when does masculinity become toxic? Traditional male gender roles can be applied to a point where it can become abusive or overly controlling, and modern applications are pushing for males to become more feminine. What is the balance? And then while we're there with the word toxic, there was another question that came in. Why does the Ummah praise Muslim UFC fighters? Beating someone for sports seems like toxic masculinity.
Yep. Okay, let's do the first one, because they're actually kind of different. So the first one is, when does masculinity become toxic? First of all, we have to realize that the terms we use are an influence of the society and its ideas and the way we structure that. So toxic masculinity, when you look at the definitions of toxic masculinity, it does talk about some of the negative stereotypes or attributes that are associated with masculinity. But there's also some really objectionable aspects to the idea of toxic masculinity.
Okay.
Because one definition I saw was the dominant form of being masculine, which is saying all men are basically essentially toxic. And sorry, I mean, I don't know why we have to all live in a situation where, you know, sisters, your father, your uncles, your grandfather, they're all toxic. And this is obviously, you might have good and bad qualities, but to call masculinity itself largely toxic is problematic, right?
Yes.
So we have to realize
Would agree with that. Yep.
But that's not to excuse that there are things that are wrong that happen from the side of males. Many things in our societies.
Exactly.
And so what is toxic masculinity? When you contradict, when you do something haram, when you do something makruh, when you do something that is against the adab of the Prophet ﷺ, that's where we can say, yeah, that's toxic. Now, the thing is, they're also going to say in toxic masculinity, they're also going to try to slip in their sexual values as well. So you know, there's a lot of things where, I mean, in reality, they're trying to say toxic masculinity is when you don't accept being very feminine or don't accept dressing a different, like the opposite gender. That's toxic. So we have to understand that we have our values, we have our threshold, and the things that are wrong with men in our societies are wrong also according to Islam. Okay, we have to realize that are truly, like, for example, being over controlling, being abusive, being belittling another gender. That's all an aspect of the toxicity.
Yes.
So we're not looking to be male here. We're looking to be manly. There's a difference.
Right.
And our definition of manly is the Prophet ﷺ, right?
Exactly. 100%.
And he was not a person that belittled other people.
No.
He was not someone who micromanaged people. He was not someone who hit a woman or a child, right? He was not someone who basically made other people serve him while he sat with his feet up. Right. So there's a big reason why our Muslim sisters are very concerned. Like, why does it speak to them? Why does this toxic masculinity speak to them? Because they're coming from some Eastern cultures in which those aspects of un-Islamic aspects have become normalized.
Right.
And when you go to the Maulana or the Shaykh and you say, help me, my dad is like this, you say, be patient, sister. Don't worry about it, sister. And so she's going to say that this other discourse of toxic masculinity appeals to me more. So we ourselves have to speak the truth, speak out about the wrongs in our community, even if it's against ourselves.
Right. And again, Shaykh, it really comes back to one simple thing. How much have you learned about the life of our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam?
Exactly.
How much?
Right.
Did you know that, he would openly have gatherings where even a female sahabiyat, this is from what I've heard from one Imam, came up within a group of men, held her piece of clothing, and it was limp. And she said, my man has this issue, this problem.
Yeah.
The Prophet ﷺ didn't say, whoa, sister, back off. This is too much of a personal issue. And you're discussing openly with men here, with men of Islam. He said, okay. He discussed it.
Right.
And then he used it as a learning moment. He used it as a teaching moment to the other Sahaba.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
That's how open
the
Prophet ﷺ was. He was all about teachable moments. He was all about compassion. He never drove anyone away.
Right. And
to the point where the Sahabiyat, the Sahabiyat, are the early women in Islam, these iconic women, had no problem discussing each and every issue with them.
Yeah, they came
No
to ask him.
problem at
They
all.
came to ask him about menstruation questions. How do we clean ourselves after menstruation? And the Prophet was shy, but where he had to speak the truth, he spoke the truth. Where his wife might be able to describe something personal, detailed, he asked her to do it. But the point is that they felt open enough to come and ask him. Whereas we're in a time these days where you can't even mention something like menstruation. You're growing up in a situation where brothers don't even know that their sisters are menstruating. And so you have to hide everything and stay quiet about it. You have to wake up and pretend that you're fasting. You wake up for suhoor, for example. So these are all examples of where our own religious culture, unfortunately, is what is distant from the prophetic example. And we have to realize that among religious people, sometimes the secular kind of like modern Muslims, they look at that behavior and they think, well, why should I be religious? The Western example is providing us better examples. So we have a lot of work to do in our own backyard.
100%.
Inshallah, then our sisters will become confident about this system, and so will the brothers.
Definitely, 100%, 100%.
Maybe
We're
a
almost
quick-
at the.
There was a second question, right?
Yeah, the quick comment on the UFC is that toxic masculinity. So
So is UFC toxic masculinity? I think that first of all, there is obviously a big Islamic question mark and problem on the idea of punching someone in the face until they're bloody and calling that entertainment, making money from it. But in this interesting, strange shift, it's become acceptable in the community to celebrate that. I think the big reason is because we're living in times where that's really the only place where we see certain qualities of like strength and prowess come out. And so the problem is we have not made our own way. The Prophet had wrestling matches. He wrestled himself.
Right.
So this idea of wrestling is not wrong.
Right.
It's what point do you get to prove that you're the bigger man, the stronger man? And because you don't have the real world where that plays out. In the past, there were warriors and stuff like that where that played out. But it was for a productive purpose. It wasn't to just, and so because of that absence of that, men feel drawn towards that. And so this is a societal problem.
Yeah, I'll offer a different take on that as well. I mean, I think it's really about you look at the GOAT, the greatest of all time for UFC, Khabib.
Yeah.
Right? Now, I'll say to everyone who's again willing to listen, Khabib is that one UFC fighter, yes, Muslim, yes, male, but he will openly talk up Islam.
Right.
He will openly defend his faith.
Right.
From Russia, no less, where it's still,
right.
I'll just call it for what it is, a communist country.
Right.
Islam is not openly practiced there, or it is.
Mm-hmm.
But Khabib was that one lightning rod of a man who said, you know what? I'm a Muslim.
Right.
I use fighting as a platform to promote Islam.
Right.
So that's just a little bit of a different take on it, right?
No,
it's not so much about toxicity as it is about, that one person who used UFC as a platform to say, I'm Muslim.
Right.
And I'm a fighter and I'm going to beat every other person while being a Muslim.
Right. And that's why it's been accepted so much from the Muslim community because, okay, at least you're in a sport and you're doing this in a positive example. And I mean, a lot of the ulama have a guilty pleasure of UFC. Like we have to be real, right? But at the same time, he said something very interesting. One thing about Khabib, right? And I just wanted to make this point is that when he was asked, is this halal or haram what you're doing?
Okay.
He was asked in public. Did he change the deen? And did he say no? And he said, what, punching in the face? This is what you're doing. He said, no, brother, it's haram. He said it's haram.
Oh, I didn't know this story.
Yes,
Okay.
I really admire him for that. That's Islamic. Don't say everything you're doing, change it and make it halal. He said, I do this. He said, I'm a human being. I smash people sometimes. He said that. So that was manly. That he's not, and this is what you have to realize as well, that not just because everything you watch or everything that's being celebrated by Muslims is necessarily all halal and all good, but you have to be able to call it out where, look, I'm a Muslim, but that one thing I do is a contradiction in my life. Don't take that from me,
right?
But listen to the rest of it.
Yes.
So who can benefit from it? If that's a greater benefit to you, that's a greater benefit. Right. Tell her you'll be home soon.
No, it's my kids calling from tutoring. This has happened many times before. It's my kids from tutoring.
About masculinity. Yeah. But if you don't benefit from it and your level is higher than that, then avoid it. That's very simple.
Absolutely. Prusakash, we're at the top of the hour and my kids are calling from tutoring. I gotta go pick them up.
if you want to leave, we can close it off.
No, all good. Let's go.
Okay, I got so we won't ask any more Instagram questions. I'm going to reply back to them that, hey, follow the Shaykh. He does Q&A sometimes. Ask your question there, inshallah.
I'll answer all those questions if they get in touch with me on Instagram or Facebook.
Okay, inshallah. So last question, I'm going to ask it. And
sure.
there's no way you can answer it in the time we have, but I'm purposely asking because now I'm gonna force you to come back, inshallah, to answer it properly.
Oh,
So
you're setting up for a
yeah, that's
second,
why I'm asking it.
part 2.
Okay.
And it's it's one of those topics that we shove under the rug in our community is, our Muslim men watching pornography, our boys growing up on it, right? I have 2 boys. I've read a lot on this, and it teaches men to degrade women, to humiliate them. That's one of the effects of it. There's many effects, and as you get in your Q&As, I see when the anonymous questions open up, like we can see this is impacting marriages. This is causing issues in people wanting to get married, sisters having doubts about people that they're marrying.
Sure.
So my question is sort of, we live in this hyper-sexualized society where a lot of this is normalized. The access is right there on your fingertips. As parents, how do we, even from an early age, from their teenagers, how do we protect from this sort of disease?
Good question.
Okay, so in a nutshell, because it is a big topic. First of all, men are primarily affected, but increasingly, as a counselor, I'm seeing women are also addicted to pornography. Some women also come forward addicted to pornography. So it's something that's affecting everybody in some way or another, in different forms. The only thing we can do is go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and our deen, make that the way that we run our lives, cut off the means of how they enter into our children's lives in an effective way while balancing the needs of the world to do homework and to do games or whatever it is.
Right.
And that means greater involvement of parents in editing that aspect of their lives, speaking about it openly and saying, look, this is a problem. Not saying if you said porn on the mimbar in the khutbah that uncles are going to get upset. Why did you say that? No, because people are going through it. Yeah. So we have to openly bring it out, why this is happening, what's happening, and then finally promote marriage and promote the most healthy, vibrant, and exciting sexual life within marriage openly, in order for us to curtail, all of us, to curtail the desires from going outside of that situation. When we can be open about that and stop the shame culture of discussing sexuality, we can try to own our own Islamic sexuality. But we are not ready for that conversation in some of the generations or some of the cultures that, living in our time and place now in this generation, we have to make that more open to save our youth.
Right. And again, and Shaykh, you're going to have to help me here. But again, I did hear from I believe it was Shaykh Yasser Khadi in one of his lectures that, there was a young Sahaba and he was just newly married. And the Prophet ﷺ himself said, have you had any intimacy with your wife yet? Have you had any kind of tender moments with your wife yet? And he actually even went so far as to say, it's actually allowed for your wife to wear something, let's just say sexy, right? And by the same token, you as well. I mean, i.e., that is, he was giving some very, very intimate kind of guidance, tips, So probably a lot of people were like, nah, you're making this up. I'm not. Again, you simply have to look at the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. He was the best example for all of humankind,
right,
and for men and for women. It's just, again, I'll go back to one simple premise. Do yourself a favor, read up about the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. To your point, Shaykh, a lot of it is available online. Go to bookstores, go to your libraries, speak with the Shaykh, the Imams, Shaykhas, not to leave out the other agenda. There are Shaykhas, there's doctors, speak to someone that can provide you that information about the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's all there. It's all there. Definitely. And that too is the best example of manliness. So Shaykh, thank you so very much. We'll wrap up there. Definitely, there's a lot in this topic that we need to bring you back for a part 2, part 3, and then we'll go from there, because this is a huge topic. And it's a must-needed topic that, again, you saw the feedback. A lot of people have these questions. The younger generation have these questions on this.
Right.
Let's help the younger generation, because obviously, they need it.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for having me, and I really look forward to visiting you guys again, inshallah.
All right. All right, everybody. I'll sign off from here. This has been a interesting podcast. Share forward. Hopefully it'll benefit, especially the young men out there, Muslim, non-Muslim. Again, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was the beacon of hope for all mankind. We are not saying that he was just for Muslims. Hopefully, if you are looking for answers to any of your questions on masculinity, on what it means to be a male, then watch this episode and share it, forward it with your friends. Jazakallah khair. This is Brother Mushtaq signing off for the Happy Strong Family team. We're out.